I don't want a government shutdown. I don't think Harry Reid should shut down the government.
The president's the one saying, I will shut down government if you don't give me everything I want on Obamacare. That to me is the president being intransigent and being unwilling to compromise.
They're the ones playing games. They need to act. They're the ones that are truly threatening a government shutdown by not being here and acting.
So the finger pointing in full throttle. That is where the shutdown battle sits tonight here. As we said, the blame game. Republicans all weekend, if you listen to the Sunday show, said, hey, don't look at us. Look at the president. You heard from the president earlier today who said, no, we will not be held hostage, in effect, here by a small faction in the House of Representatives just because they didn't like something that got passed in the House, the Senate, and even validated by an election and given blessing by the High Court. Andrew, where does the public stand on this?
Well, we got a new CNN poll out today, and to quote Shakespeare, if I could, there will be a pox on both their houses, but the bigger pox seems likely to fall on the GOP. Here's the new CNN poll. 46% think the GOP more responsible for a shutdown. 36% say President Obama. 13% say both. But this question may be the larger indictment. What's the most important job for Congress in this mess? 60% say pass a budget and avoid a shutdown. Only 34% say stop Obamacare. Even the length of a shutdown is a problem. The longer the shutdown, the less popular it is. And finally, the sort of eat your dinner or no dessert question. 69% of voters say the GOP is acting like spoiled children in all of this. Only 25% describe them as reasonable adults. For Democrats also scoring high on the acting like children scale, but it was about 50%. It wasn't anywhere near as high as Republicans.
Well, let's bring in a couple of reasonable adults here. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Yale College, professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author, and Andrew, who you already met. You know what's interesting, Jeannie, out of this is I didn't think we'd get to this point, and now that we're here, I don't know how this necessarily ends, but I do know I'm much more worried about what happens, when we actually get to the funds and all the rest. They're going to get hurt by this thing, but we all get hurt if 3 weeks from now, this thing keeps playing out the way it is today. It's a little scary what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, and there's a school of thought, and we heard David Gergen say this over the weekend, that it is important that we have a shutdown actually tonight, that the government shuts down, because hopefully that will give some shock therapy to these people, get these two, parties talking to each other.
Explain that a little bit more, because they said you need to break the fever. What do they mean?
Well, so far it is a big problem, and I know that the Republicans have been chastised, but you need to have people together to negotiate this out. There are ways to negotiate this thing. There was a great picture in the Times over the weekend of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich sitting together during the 95, 96, working this thing out. How did we avoid it the last couple of years? We avoided it because Barack Obama got together with John Boehner, whether it was on the golf course or elsewhere. You had the vice president getting together with Mitch McConnell. That's what we need, people talking.
But if you listen to Bill Clinton and even Newt Gingrich, it was different then. The reason it got resolved was Bill Clinton said, I didn't give anything significant. I gave a little face statement, there it is. But Newt Gingrich could carry his caucus. This time around, the most open secret in Washington, Dominic, is John Boehner cannot control this. We know right now if they had a clean vote on this, if they had a CR, translation here, they just put it up on the table the way it is with no conditions, it would pass the House tonight. Forget about the Senate. It would pass the House. But Boehner won't let that happen because 60 to 80 Tea Party folks seem to be running not only the party, but in some ways the country tonight.
That is indeed the case, and that's what's scary about this entire thing, Richard. I want to go back to Andrew's poll, and the professor is right in terms of it does take two to tango in this case, or each side perhaps can give. But how do you negotiate, and we've been saying this every night, how do you negotiate with someone that is throwing a kamikaze fit, if you will, at you?
And they made it clear, they don't believe compromise.
Or the highway.
They don't believe that compromise should be part of the playbook. I think that's what's different when we go back to even the Clinton-Gingrich things, which we always say, my God, they shut the government down over this. But you listen to some of the older Republicans, in the Senate, like the McCains and everybody else, be like, what are you doing? You can't do this. If you don't make part of Obamacare, I think the best play the Republicans could have had, Andrew, is, wait a minute, X, Y, and Z. We don't like these things. Let's negotiate these three elements of it. The president would be put in a box. That's a rational, reasonable concern. It's not a perfect piece of legislation. But to say, nope, to fund the whole thing, it's dead. Why have a government? Why have an election? Why have a process?
Let me play devil's advocate, though, and that is not what they said over the weekend. They didn't say defund this time. They said
hold it
delay.
For another year.
They
and
said
who
delay.
Thinks,
and
who
the
thinks
president
in a year from now that they would then inflate?
I am not in favor of this strategy, but the president has delayed parts of this already. So just to be clear, they did not the second time say defund. They said delay, and the president hasn't been able to yet explain why you can delay parts for business, parts for small business, big business, and not individuals.
He answered it today, though. He answered it today. He said today, who in their right mind, in effect, thinks that if I delay it for a day, a week, a month, or a year, that at the point when we come up again, they won't again insist on defunding the whole process? He has offered, and it's not perfect, but he's offered them an opportunity, I think, the best lifeline they have to say, fine, we want to go over these 3 items. Devices was one, there was a few others in.
And I agree with you. I mean, I don't think this is good strategy for Republicans, but we have to be fair on what they said. And I do think there is a way to negotiate this thing out. If you had the Senate come through and say, okay, we're going to repeal the tax on the medical devices, we're going to give you the Keystone Pipeline. You know, you could do certain things.
What does the Keystone Pipeline have
because
to do?
It's part of
what does it have to do with the medical plan?
What does any of this have to do with it?
No.
It has, but that's how these things. 17 times we've had the government shut down since 1977. It's had to do with the fairness doctrine. It never has to do with things that have to do with the budget. But that's how you negotiate. You figure out what they want, you give them a piece of it, and you give them the other part.
But Professor, under this scenario, let's say the president did exactly what you said.
Well, it wouldn't be it would have to be the Senate.
Okay, but if the Democrats went along, what happens the next time the Republicans want something and they threaten the same tactics? What happens
happened
then?
the 17 other times this has happened?
There was a different Congress.
And most of those 17 times.
Of course there was a different Congress.
A different ideological Congress.
There's a different. Listen, I am not defending the Republicans, but what I'm saying is that it is ahistorical to pretend this hasn't happened in the past.
But you're distorting the history a little bit, Judy, because most of the time it's been about budget numbers, and we want $7 trillion.
How is the fairness doctrine? How is abortion about budget numbers?
You said 17. That's 2. Most of the time we've seen the government shut down, it's been because $8 trillion versus $6 trillion, let's compromise and meet in the middle on $7 trillion. It's been about the numbers. It hasn't necessarily been about political planks or specific pieces of ideology.
But Andrew, that's where you're wrong. If you ask the Republicans, this is exactly about numbers. It's about money. That's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about jobs that they think are, are going to be lost to Obamacare. They're thinking about numbers. You're going to pretend this isn't, and I understand that you want to say that, but they do think it's about numbers. And I am not here to defend them, but I'm here to say it is ahistorical to pretend that there's no way out of this thing. There is a way to negotiate this thing out.
They don't want this president to have a signature achievement. I'm sorry, that's the way it appears to me.
Of course they don't. Why would they want him to? They're the opposition party. Of course they don't.
Because, Professor, it's for the good of the country.
But I'm sorry, when would the Democrats want a Republican to have an achievement? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't work that way. That's not human nature. Forget about who wants who to look good or look bad. There's a different thing that, for me, I haven't seen before that I'm seeing now. I'm seeing people in elected office who believe that the whole basic schoolhouse rock that we all learned when we were growing up about how a bill becomes a law doesn't count anymore. Supreme Court looks at it, doesn't count anymore. And it's not about obstructionism, it's about legislative pyromania. That we all believe that you should have means to an end. Strategy, fine. They want to make it about a pipeline. This is not about a pipeline. Republicans I was using that as an example.
I understand that. But Republicans have been using, I'm with you. But Republicans on and even off the record, a lot of them are saying, we're in a box right now because these guys are going to take us off a cliff and they don't know what they want.
But Richard, that is the difference, is right there. You have a party that is not healthy. You have a party that is not responsible. The Democrats were there in the 1970s and the early 1980s.
But they never threatened to take us off a cliff.
Well, yeah, but you know, this is how the Republican Party is operating. I agree. It's not in their interest to bang their head against the wall, but it bothers me that
they're stepping on their message, Richard.
They're
stepping on their own message.
But that's what makes them scariest of all. That makes them scariest of all to me is they don't. what everyone would argue at this table, the four of us, with all the elections and the politics we've covered, clearly there's winners and losers. They don't think they lose if they cause, forget about this, the debt limit. Do you understand the conversation? We've hit this before.
But
the debt limit?
I understand, and I agree with you.
That's
It is
scary.
It is big time scary. But do you understand the individuals don't lose because their constituents will re-elect them if
that's
they
the
keep
scariest
doing
thing
what
to
they're
me.
doing.
This is why
But
I'm
that
actually
is about
hopeful.
the system, which Andrew doesn't want to talk to me about.
But this is it's a great
I
piece
gotta
of
hit a
coverage
break,
you
too,
post.
so.
This is why I'm hopeful about it. I think we are going to have a shutdown, but I think it's better to have a shutdown than to have it impact the debt limit. And I think we're looking at a couple of weeks of this, but I think it's actually going to, this thing needs to be resolved.
You believe, Andrew, about that you can break a fever, like we talked with Jeannie, and many of us have argued, like David Gergen, that this will be healthy in the long term because
do.
people have to find a consequence. I'm only saying, I don't know if they really believe in the same consequences the rest of us do. Now, obviously, sadly, we're going to be talking about this in the coming days. When we come back, we're going to come closer to home. There is a documentary out, a mini documentary out about Christine Quinn. And you have to see it to really believe how a person so many thought had the primary all but locked up. You see firsthand how throughout the whole process, quickly those dreams are dashed, and you have it from a very close eye view. Please stay with us. We'll show you.